Hi everybody, welcome to the first lesson of Business Management 3-4. Today we're going to be addressing the first half of the content from the first area study, which is all about business foundations. So today we're going to be addressing the different types of businesses, the four main business objectives, and the first issue of corporate culture. So the first area study of business management is pretty introductory, and this is all stuff that you will use throughout the rest of the course. So it's a building block for the rest of your knowledge from Business Management 3-4. So it's really important to have a good grasp on all this content before moving on. Because the content in Unit 3 Area Study 1 is a bit shorter, this area study will only be in 2 videos. Before we get started, I just wanted to address some of the main task words that come up in business management. So some of the main task words that do come up is your define, which is really just regurgitating the definition from a textbook or from these videos. You only really need one sentence to get both the marks. Next, we have discuss, which is positives and negatives or strengths and weaknesses. And then we also have explain, which is really just 2 sentences if it's a 2-mark, 4 sentences if it's a 4-mark question, explaining what that concept is and going into detail about the issues that come up in that topic or in that definition. They're the main kind of task words that would come up from this area study. So now let's go on to some content. So the first type of business that we need to know about is a sole trader. So a sole trader essentially just has one owner. And so what that means is that that one owner is responsible for bringing all ideas and all money into the business, which does make it a bit more harder to establish because you need to have money to begin with. Another issue associated with a sole trader is the fact that it's called an unlimited liability. So a sole trader is essentially under the same name as the owner. So the business is under the owner's name. What that means is that if the business goes into debt, the owner's assets are at risk. So if they own a house or a car or a boat, that can be sold and the money will be used to pay off the business's debts. So we call it unlimited liability because that owner has a lot of risk associated with establishing a sole trader. Despite that, it's very simple and inexpensive to establish. There's not very many government regulations and laws that need to be addressed when establishing a sole trader. And really all you need is an ABN and that kind of thing. And one last thing to remember about a sole trader is that if the owner leaves the business or they unfortunately die, the business will no longer exist. So we call that no perpetuity. The next type of business that you need to know is a partnership. So a partnership has between 2 to 20 owners. And again, those owners' assets are at risk. So again, they have unlimited liability. So that once again means that if the business comes into debt, the owner's assets can be used to pay off the business's debts. Like a sole trader, the business for a partnership also doesn't have perpetuity. So if one of the partners decides to leave, then the business will no longer exist, which is a big risk. There are 2 types of partnerships that are good to know, but not essential, just for some extra knowledge. So we have a general partnership, which is where every single owner of the 2 to 20 is equally responsible for all the debts. So if there's 20 owners, the debts are divided by 20. The other type of partnerships are a limited partnership, which means that some of the partners have a very limited partnership. So they can only be at risk for the amount that they invest into the business. So if they gave 10% of the investment, they're only liable for 10% of that debt, even though there might be 18 partners. So it's a bit less risky for those partners that have limited partnerships. But that's nothing too important, so don't worry about that too much. The main benefits of a partnership is that because there are more people involved, it's a lot easier to raise money. And also there are different ideas and experiences and skills being brought forward from the different partners. The next type of business that you need to know is a private limited company. So this is a bit different from the last 2 in that a company means that the business is actually registered as its own legal entity. So what we call that is incorporation. Incorporation means that the business itself is registered and it essentially acts as a person. So by law, if the business comes into debt, the owners are no longer at risk. It's the business that then has to pay off that debt. So what that means is the shareholders and owners of a company, their assets are no longer at risk, which makes it a lot more reliable, and it's more of a safer option for shareholders and owners. So that's what we call limited liability. It's less risky and a better option for owners. Also, unlike the partnership and sole traders that we spoke about before, the business has perpetuity. And that kind of makes sense because there's a lot more people involved. If you have 50 shareholders and one decides to leave the business, it doesn't really make sense that the business would then cease to exist and no longer be functioning. So it's a bit more secure in that if someone wants to leave, it doesn't actually risk anything to the business, and the business can still operate with 49 shareholders instead of 50. Another important thing to remember about a private limited company is that in order for shares to be bought, you have to have the permission of all other owners. So if there are, say, 10 shareholders in this business and they want to get an 11th shareholder to raise some more money, all of the 10 shareholders have to approve that transaction. So that's something definitely to remember, and I would definitely use that as a point of contrast with the public limited company that we will talk about in 1 second. Another thing about a company just to remember is that they are more expensive and there are a lot more government regulations just because of the fact that that actual business is operating as its own legal entity rather than the owners. So there are some more regulations involved. And that brings us on to the fourth type of business. So we have a public listed company. So public listed companies have an unlimited number of shareholders. So think of your big companies like Google, Tesla, all those companies, and they're listed on stock exchanges. So people all over the world can buy shares into those companies. And so that's why it's called public, because they're publicly listed and can be publicly bought. So unlike a private company, you don't need the permission of all other shareholders to buy another share or to have another shareholder. And that just makes sense. You know, if there's millions of shareholders, why it's ridiculous to need every single person to approve it. Again, because it's a company, there is limited liability because it's a separate legal entity to the shareholders. And again, there's perpetuity. So if one of the million shareholders sells their shares, the company will continue to exist. Again, it just kind of, common sense. The next type of business is a social enterprise. So social enterprises, you don't need to know as much detail in the sense that you don't really need to know strengths and weaknesses. The main thing that you need to know about a social enterprise is the fact that all the money that they make is to generate money towards a social cause. So if they make $1 million from selling a product, they will reinvest that $1 million to fulfilling a social need and benefiting the community. So that might be distributing that money to a charity or, funding other programs, schools, or water programs and that kind of thing. They can be for profit or not for profit. So if they're for profit, they'll take a percentage out, for salaries and that kind of thing, or entirely 100% of the money generated will be sent towards that social need. And an example of that is Thank You Water, who uses the $2 from every bottle to fund wells and clean water programs throughout the third world. The next type of business that you need to know is a government business enterprise. So essentially what a GBE is it carries out businesses on behalf of the government. So, the government doesn't have time to carry out every single necessary function in society. So they will go to businesses and say, can you please do this on our behalf? So the government will outline what they want the business to do. It's not actually the government, it's just works closely with the government and carries out a function on behalf of the government. So good examples of that is Public Transport Victoria and also Australia Post, which obviously carry out functions such as transport services and postal services on behalf of the government. And that's all for the business types. Now we move on to our business objectives. So there are 4 main business objectives that come up in business management. And these are things that you really need to get a good grasp on. Really all you need is a good definition of each one and just, a general understanding of what each is. These will come up again and again and again throughout the course. So the first one is to make a profit, which really every single business has. And essentially profit is just all the money you raise, so your revenue, minus your expenses. So if you generate $100,000 a year from selling tickets, but you have $25,000 in expenses, then your profit is $75,000. And even for businesses like social enterprises, they're still wanting to make a profit to be able to have money to reinvest into that social cause. So really every single type of business is, operating to make a profit, because without some sort of profit, they can't remain operable and they can't continue to exist into the future. The next type of business that you need to know is to increase market share. So market share is essentially the proportion of sales that a business owns or controls in proportion to the entire industry. So if you have a look down the bottom to that diagram with the blue, the pink and green and yellow pie chart. So the business with the blue obviously has the greatest market share in that industry. So let's say this is supermarkets. The blue one might be Coles, the pink one might be Woolworths, the green one might be IGA, and the yellow is Aldi. So every single business in that chart is going to want to have a greater control of that pie and increase their slice of the pie, because that means that they have more customers, they have more sales, and therefore more profit. A really good way of increasing market share is through price, being competitive in your pricing, either by having lower cost items or having higher cost items which are of a higher quality. So either cost or quality is a way to get a bigger slice of the market. The third type of business objective is to fulfill a social need. This is a primary objective of a social enterprise, but all kind of businesses may have some sort of social objective. So a social objective is to carry out functions that are necessary to society. So that might be to reduce poverty, to increase employment opportunities for disadvantaged youths, all the extra things that a business can do to benefit the society that they operate within. And finally, the last business objective that you need to know is to meet shareholder expectations. So meeting shareholder expectations essentially again means increasing sales and profits, because if you're increasing your sales and profits, the business has more money to then distribute to their shareholders. So if you have $100,000 and you have 10 shareholders, each one will get $10,000. But if you only make $50,000 and you have 10 shareholders, each one will only get $5,000. So we call that a dividend. So a dividend is the amount that a shareholder receives from investing into the business. So meeting shareholder expectations is essentially also just increasing sales and profit. The next little bit of the business objectives topic that you need to know is your visions, mission, and value statements. These aren't very important, but it's good just to have a definition of each in your notes. Sometimes they do come up, but quite rarely. So the vision statement is what the business wants to become, and it outlines its future goals. So I have an example here from Coles, and their vision statement is to become the most trusted retailer in Australia and have long-term shareholder value. So they just want to be the most trusted retailer in Australia. That's their future goal, and that's why they continue to operate. And that's what they're striving towards in the future. Similarly, the mission statement is outlining what the business's purpose is and how it aims to achieve that purpose. So Coles' purpose is to sustainably feed all Australians and help them live a healthier and happier life. So again, what do they stand for? What's their purpose? Why do they create the business in the first place? And finally, the value statement outlines the qualities and attributes the business wants to display and prioritize. So for Coles, that's energy, enthusiasm, and responding at a pace that's at their best. So they're qualities that they want their employees to display when working at Coles. And that brings us on to the next point, which is your areas of management responsibility. So in order to achieve the 4 business objectives that we just went through, you need to have different areas of management responsibility to carry out all of those business objectives. So there are 5 different areas of management responsibility, because we normally will put together the sales and marketing as one kind of area, because their roles are quite similar. So the first one that you need to know is your finance. So finance area of management responsibility in a business is responsible for looking at all the reporting and all the budget and making sure that the business remains profitable. So finance is responsible for ensuring that there is enough money on hand to invest into new business ideas, and also making sure that past business ideas and changes are generating enough profit for the business and are worthwhile. So they're responsible for looking at all your key performance indicators like profit, market share, productivity, that kind of thing, and ensuring that there's enough money on hand for the business. The next area of management responsibility is operations, and this comes up more in the third area study. So for now, it's just good to have a definition, a brief idea of it, but we'll go into a lot more detail later on. So operations is responsible for transforming the materials, so the raw inputs and materials used, into your finished product, which is then sold for profit. So if you're making clothes, you need to turn the cotton, the dyes, fabrics into a finished t-shirt. And so the operations manager is responsible for finding those inputs and purchasing them off suppliers and ensuring the products are of a high quality. Next, there's the technological developments area of management responsibility. And so they're responsible for maintaining the existing technology through maintenance and checks and that kind of thing, and also implementing new technology to improve the business's performance by increasing efficiency and effectiveness. So that might be researching new technologies that they think would be in the business's best interests. Next, we have our human resources, which again, we go into in the secondary study. So there'll be a lot more content on this later on. But essentially, the HR manager is just responsible for ensuring that the relationship between employees and employers are positive and that there's no conflict and tension within the business. Ways that the HR manager can do that is by motivating employees through training, improving their skills, paying them the correct amount, paying them an amount that is fair. And also they are responsible for hiring the right kinds of people that will make the business productive and a desirable workplace, and also terminating and firing any employees that don't really fit in with the business's corporate culture and ideals. Finally, we have our sales and marketing. It's good just to know the difference between the two, but in a question you can talk about the two together. So sales is responsible for selling the product to individual customers to generate profit, whereas marketing is responsible for advertising the product and increasing brand awareness, so that, if the product is targeted towards high school students, it's high school students that are seeing the ads on social media and on TV, and are therefore the ones going out and buying the product to generate brand awareness and generate sales. Now moving on to corporate culture. So corporate culture is the shared attitudes and behaviors within a business. So essentially it is the ideas and behaviors that the business wants to display. And it's the way that the employees interact with one another and managers and employees interact with one another. There are two different types of corporate culture that you need to know: official and real. So official is what the business wants the corporate culture to be. And so it's the values and ideas and beliefs that are presented on their website and their advertising. And so like a value statement for Coles, it outlines the behaviors, values, attitudes that they want their employees to display so that the business becomes that desired state. Whereas real corporate culture is the behaviors and interactions which actually take place between employees. And these can be observed by outsiders like customers or managers. And so the difference between real and official is usually quite different, because what the business wants isn't usually what always happens. So, even though they might say that they want to be enthusiastic and hardworking, in reality, maybe the employees are demotivated and don't like their job, so they won't be displaying those behaviors within the business. And that brings us on to the next issue, which is ways to improve corporate culture. So strategies to improve corporate culture is all about reducing the difference between your real and your official corporate culture. So if the business's official corporate culture is to be enthusiastic and hardworking, what's some ways that we can improve the real corporate culture, the way that the employees actually interact with one another, to achieve that official corporate culture that's displayed on the business's logos and websites? So the first one is similar to what we've already spoken about, but having a very clear vision and value statements to outline the desired behaviours for employees. So having a statement like Coles to be enthusiastic so that employees know that that's what's expected of them and can then try harder to work and display those qualities. Another way of improving corporate culture is removing any formal barriers between employees and employers so that employees don't feel like they're inferior to their managers and other employees in the business. Everyone's working as a team, everyone's seen as an equal and is able to put forward their ideas in the business. Another way is to implement diversity within your employees, so hiring employees from a range of different backgrounds, ages, ethnicities, nationalities, religions, age groups. That's really, really important to make it seem like an inclusive and desirable workplace, which will then motivate your employees and make them want to emulate those qualities that they are expected to. Another good way is to change the physical layout of the business to be more inclusive. So similar to delayering, rather than having offices that are very separate and that doesn't really allow for a lot of teamwork and collaboration and communication, having one big table in the middle of the office, like a board table where people can collaborate and share their ideas together. That allows for better working relationships as well as improving corporate culture. And finally, social events, whether that be, employee of the month events or a Friday night drinks event, Christmas parties, those kinds of things improve working relationships between employees and also improve working relationships between employees and their employers so that everyone feels like one team and it improves the corporate culture as people want to go to work because they enjoy their job. And so that brings us to the end of our first lesson for Area Study 1. I hope that you enjoyed this lesson and I hope that you have found this a bit easier to tackle Unit 3, Area Study 1 of Business Management.